So before folks get too comfortable, there will be elements, I'm so sorry, of group work. Yes. So maybe don't sit in the nether realms where you cannot collaborate with anyone. Or move, during the session. Both are valid. And because this topic has come up once already, we will not be covering the use of AI in teaching or grading during the session. That is what alcohol after the session is for. I have been bouncing around Europe lecturing on that for the last 110 days, so I have opinions, but that's for after, and I will just be stomping on anyone who brings up the teaching side of things, because if we start down that path, forever it shall dominate our destiny. So, just letting that be out there. So my current goal is to join the online session on my laptop so that I can see chat, which is a series of choices. And then I get to see me, all questions. An hour ago. Fascinating. Oh, this is for the chat break for the LM session. Because, of course, I cannot clear chat. Okay, so let's just, there we are. Hey folks, if you will give me a few moments so that I can put the appropriate links to the shared doc in chat. While I get that set up, I will ask you all to join the shared notes document, because this is going to be interactive in the sense that we are going to be generating that document. Excellent. Okay, no, too many attempts. Retry after 60 seconds. Sure. Welcome. I'll leave this up for a few moments more. Unfortunately, I cannot show both the rough agenda and this at the same time as the slides, so we'll have a few moments. In rough sense, what my goal is today is to establish the basis of a birds of a feather, the basis of an interest group. I think that there need to be standards for how we engage with and publish our interactions with large language models. I'm just going to say AI. I know AI is 70 years old. I've stopped trying to fight that fight, so I'm just going to say AI, and I apologize for my sin. Our interactions with AI in terms of our prompts and in terms of our engagements, in terms of our outputs and in terms of our models, because quite frankly, I think that the disclosure, here's what I used, is utterly pointless. And that here at RDA, we are in a position to start having conversations about creating those standards and about creating those expectations. So, does everyone who is interested have a link to the shared notes document? If not, wave vigorously. Also, because this is hybrid, first off, anyone who is hybrid, please give me a thumbs up or say hi in chat just so that I can see that we have folks online. But because we're hybrid, anytime that you're speaking to the room, I will unfortunately have to pass you the microphone. So let's just keep that in mind. Okay, it doesn't look like anyone else is loading the shared notes document, so let us proceed. The plan for today is that I will give roughly a 20-minute introduction to where my thinking is around these. Why is this a problem? And then we will break into groups and have discussions about the specific challenges thereby. The best birds of a feather are where everyone gets to actually talk and think. This is not a lecture, this is not a keynote, this is not a presentation, this is a conversation. In that vein, if I say something strange, or you have a question during the first part, ask me, because I guarantee you that other people have that thought. I built this birds of a feather proposal, this working towards an interest group, with my colleague Sean Ross, who is unfortunately not able to make it today. So we just have my name on things because that's what he asked me to do. And these slides are Creative Commons, so please enjoy. The fact that the license isn't clearly showing is deeply frustrating to me, but I use the templates. It's Creative Commons license. Use them, have fun. I have links to my prompts at the end, so you can see how I worked with AI to help think through them. Because it's really pointless if I don't follow my own norms. I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and we pay our respect to their elders, past and present. The guiding principles here are really, really important because it is quite likely that in this session we will disagree. My objective here is for us to build consensus around work towards an interest group. My objective is not to prescribe how people should use AI. I have deep opinions, but that waits for beer. Right? And so insofar, following these things, following the code of conduct, because we're going to have very different opinions on the quality and nature of AI, is deeply important. Any questions so far? Should I swap over to the QR code for latecomers? Or can you, no, join. So how do we disclose AI use in research? This comes from my research. So I'm Brian Ballsun-Stanton, Macquarie University. I have a paper out with QUT on frameworks for making research policy about AI. How do you make a research policy for your university? Here is a very complicated diagram and a bunch of steps that you will ignore. I'm honest, sorry. And for the vast majority of journals, and I'm going to note this, for the vast majority of journals, they require disclosure statements. So they require scientists, okay, I cannot stand behind that lectern. So they require scientists to step up and pin a red badge of, I've used AI, on their papers. I have used AI to make this presentation. The vast majority of journals have that as their basis. That disclosure or acknowledgement is there. Now, happily, we've moved away from the benighted times of 2023 where ChatGPT is my co-author. And most journals have pushed against the idea that you should cite personal communication, ChatGPT. So most journals are require disclosure. Some medical journals especially require discussion in methodology if you use large language models as part of your research process. But very few journals require actually showing your work. My fundamental thesis here is that we should treat our prompts and the output of AI just like we treat our code and just like we treat our data, so that people can look at our prompts and judge if that is appropriate. The overwhelming majority will not, but if something goes weird and someone wants to know the provenance of some aspect, those logs should be available. Usually that's going to be as part of an ethics investigation, but still, that's one of the reasons why we publish our data, so that you can figure out if you didn't drag all the way down the column in Excel, and if half your measurements are dates. That's my thesis. And so, because we have folks, I'm going to swap back to the Word document. I'm going to swap back to the Word document so that people can join the shared notes document as they wish. Any questions so far while we wait for folks to join the shared notes? Also, by the way, if people want to be annotating and having discussions in the shared notes document, even in this first part, I will be very happy and very excited. I would be delighted if we actually start building our shared notes while there's things to take notes on. Okay, so I'll swap back, maybe grab this from a neighbor if there's still challenges. So the requirements are fundamentally inconsistent. Our norms are inconsistent. Where should a large language model be used during the paper writing process? Opinions vary. Quick question, how many philosophers in the room? So if I start talking about Kuhn, am I about to be crucified? Cool. I would actually posit that it's starting to look a lot like a paradigm shift, not in the happy, like technology by our product sense, but in the we have a bunch of facts that are difficult to explain sense. And the conflict between scientific research paradigms is starting to show. I'm not saying which one is better. I am saying that they are different in a way that is noticeable. Our standards for what and how to disclose are fundamentally inconsistent by journal, by discipline, by faculty, by time of day, which means that we, as researchers, have no expectations on what is allowed, what is licit but we don't talk about, what is illicit but we still do, and what is actually problematic. And I think that we at the RDA have the ability to start that conversation, because disclosure of use or acknowledgement of use, it's not acknowledgement, it's not a person, you're not thanking them. It's not a citation, they're not an authority, you're not citing them. Disclosure is not documentation, but even more to the point, disclosure isn't reproducibility. I think that we can borrow the ideas of fair data and reproducible research for AI. Sure, we can call them spicy autocomplete all we want. Sometimes it definitely feels that way. But they are going to be vibe consistent for a given model, which means that there is a fundamental vibe reproducibility there that we can engage with in the same intuitions that we do about data and that we do about code. Therefore, what I would love to gather a group together, an interest group together, is for publishing large language model interactions. And I had a lovely conversation just as we were starting with someone about fine-tuning models. And I would say that interactions can be both valid for prompting, which is my original thesis, and fine-tuning. So any interactions that we as researchers have with models after the point that models are published, we treat like code with the exact same standards. Note, I'm not just saying the outputs. The outputs are pointless. I'm saying our inputs, because it's our inputs that lead to the outputs, and it's our inputs upon which we can be judged. Therefore, we have to talk about what our standards are, what the formats are, because I have a bunch of OSF repos with PDFs that I've produced of my interactions because I follow my own norms, right? But what are our standards? What are our formats? Can we build tools to extract all useful metadata with our interactions from AI? All right. Thanks, crowd. Right? Can we do that? And most to the point, can we, as an RDA interest group, articulate norms, the shoulds, the should-nots, the musts, the must-nots, that help us to actually keep research useful and, to a degree, trusted, whatever that word means this week. Because I would assert that prompting, actually, before we do that, that was a section break, pause. What questions do you have? Chat has none. Ah, excellent. I'm going.
Do you need me in the mic?
Unfortunately, we are recording this, so
Unfortunately, on the record.
Yes. Oh yeah. No, this is me on the record. It's great. Also, please state your name and institution. I got a grumpy email saying that I had to remind you of that.
No worries. Christina Drummond, University of North Texas, and the executive director for the Open Access book, Usage Data Trust. So we're working with a data space and the data space protocol. And I bring that up here because I want to point out something key between the difference between publishing data, which is a one-time transaction to make it accessible, and what you're proposing here, which is a transaction over time. This is something where if you're interacting, that's not just one point, you're now managing those transactions in an ongoing dynamic way. And I just want to posit for the room that transforms how we have to think about it. We can't just drop it in a repository and say good enough.
I completely agree. Right now, the way I do that is I have little folders in Claude where I have little projects and try to organize things. And then for a given paper, I try to put all of my things for that paper. Obviously, there's much more that we can wish for. And that if we think about our use of large language models as something that is something we do on our way to work and have a conversation about some of the points in a paper, how do we capture that? So yes, there's quite a large space that we can play in. The place where I want to start is how do we show our work? That is my fundamental question, because I say that the disclosure statement is insufficient, and I also say that forbidding it doesn't work. We cannot reliably detect good AI-generated text. We can, however, do all of the problems of English as a second language discrimination. We can do neurodiverse discrimination. We should be absolutely savage at poor judgment when it comes to AI. And again, talk to me in the pub about how that relates to grading. I have opinions. They will not make the budgets of our universities happy. But yes, how do we show our work? How do we allow our peers to judge our judgment in the use of AI as it relates to our research process? Okay, no other questions on chat. We'll keep going. Oh, yes, wonderful. Thank you.
You're ignoring me. This is Nsundeni Louis Mapatahani from Walter Sisulu University in South Africa. I actually agree with your thesis, first of all, but help me understand this. Now, when we talk reproducibility, right, I'm a scientist, so I know I'll do an experiment, I'll document it, and somebody else can run it and get the same results then, yes. Now, this assumes, well, in the use of AI and LLMs, this assumes that information and knowledge is constant.
Is our audio coming through, or am I just projecting? I can hear you. Great.
Okay. So, in my head, the assumption is that then that knowledge is constant for it to be reproduced. Now, we know that LLMs are not. The knowledge grows with time depending on the different interactions that are taking place and context. Now, help me unpack that. Thank you.
Great. A large language model operates in read-only mode. A large language model infers the next token purely from the context of your current conversation, star. The star is there because OpenAI is doing their best to disguise that fact, but a given model, when it produces output in a read-only mode. It produces output on the series of interactions that you have had within that chat only. Anything beyond that is a function of it interacting with traditional databases or searching the web in some way. New models are released, which is why having documentation of which model we use and which service we use is essential. But they do not grow or change or learn for a given model release. They just look like they do. Sorry, did I answer your question?
I'm answering.
Great.
Robert Shen from MIT University. Can I follow up on this one? Because in terms of the same model, you use the same prompt engineering for 10 times. There is a high chance the answer will be slightly different. So if this will be the case, what is the purpose for reproducibility?
The answer will be different in terms of the words, but it will be mostly consistent in terms of the vibe. The sense of the message will be consistent. The punctuation it uses and the way it goes, the overwhelming majority of the time will be consistent. Obviously, if we are doing research with large language models on a large data set, we set the temperature to 0 and then it is consistent for much greater values of consistency. But reproducibility here is, what did I prompt? What was the output as a series of interactions within that specific context window? And can people sit in judgment of that? Because, like, in terms of code, sure, it is deterministic. In terms of prompts, it is remarkably consistent over time. If you want to take a look, Ethan Mollick, 2023, wrote "Now is the time for grimoires," where literally you can share prompts as a way of making knowledge explicit. And so, in many ways, what I'm saying here is how we should document our methodology.
Hi, Kira McNeese, Research Transparency Manager at Cambridge University Press. I liked at the intro how we talked about treating LLMs as just like another tool that we need to document the same way we document data. I also take the point that they're not 100% consistent. I mean, especially when you look at things like assisted information retrieval, you can get different results. But I mean, this is not a new or unique problem in research. There's a lot of kinds of research where you're never going to get 100% the exact same results. There's things like observational studies. There's whole areas of humanities and social sciences which hate the phrase reproducibility because their work is never necessarily strictly reproducible. So there are a lot of fields that have looked at this similar problems, I think, and just because we're not going to have perfect reproducibility of the exact results doesn't mean that it's not valuable to document as much as we can, as with any other field where you don't have exact results every time.
Thanks. And I would definitely say that there is vibe reproducibility, which is a statement.
James Wilson, UCL. Yeah, you're quite right, Kira, that in the humanities and stuff, you don't talk about reproducibility, you talk about transparency, typically. Should we be using transparency as the terminology here, or is there a reason to use reproducibility in that slightly stricter connotations that it has?
That's a really good question. Okay.
Sorry, I mean, I would say what I found since joining Cambridge University Press, initially my job title was Research Data Manager, and 2/3 of our journals are HSS journals. They wouldn't listen to me because they didn't want to talk about data, but talk about transparency, and a lot of those people will start listening and discussing what transparency means in their field as opposed to data or reproducibility.
The only reason why, sorry, Jens, are you waving or just, cool. The only reason why I would not completely agree is I think that there is a methodological reproducibility here. Okay, so digress, oh.
Just drop by, thank you. I'd like to clarify, your issue identified here is based on the idea that one LLM for one research topic?
Sorry,
Sorry. It's Mikiko Tanifuji from NII Tokyo, providing national research data infrastructure. Now, what was my question?
So
one LLM for one of the research processes, is that what you're trying to identify?
So when you engage with Claude or Gemini or at worst ChatGPT, please don't use the free version, you will be sad. Every single chat interaction that we do as part of our research process, understood broadly, is part of our methodology and is subject to other people going, hey, do I like your judgment?
Well, in such case, how do you document AI agents, which is normally part of entire a research project?
That's a really good question that we need to set standards for. A lot of the movement of large language model industry is moving towards less and less transparency. And I think that we have a position to say, no, if you're going to publish with this, we've got to see the gears, we've got to see the guts and inspect them. To get back to the prior point, Moloch's grimoires, the fundamental thesis there is that the tacit knowledge in our head is rendered explicit when we turn it into a prompt that works. And just like a spell book, we can pass it to someone else, and they can take advantage of the explicit knowledge that we have turned into text. And it's this process of making the tacit explicit where I think that there is flavors of reproducibility. I don't think it's reproducibility in the classical sense, but I think it's more than transparency because there's very much that reuse question behind you and then you.
Andrew Treloar, Australian Research Data Commons. So I like the spell analogy. The problem is that the cauldrons keep changing.
Oh yeah.
And the versions of the cauldrons keep changing. And worse, it's often not possible to go back to an earlier version of the cauldron. So knowing that you use spell 35 on cauldron version 1.0 is not going to do me a lot of good if I can't get access to that particular cauldron.
Cool. Let me respond to them. Do you want to respond or a different topic?
I was just adding on what has been said. Just an idea that came up. Because we usually, in the science, general science research, you would, when you do your statistics, then document your variance. Is it possible with LLMs to then, when you are with the thesis that you're proposing, to also then document what would be the variance of your output? Then perhaps then you could more or less control for the variability of what would come out in future if we are trying to do reproducibility?
So let me respond to this in a stack. Yes, and if you're using AI as part of your research workflow, i.e. to code things, sorry, I use code in the social science sense, this is a good message. This is a bad message. We 100% do multiple runs to ensure consistency. In terms of using AI as part of our research, show me the researcher who has time. I genuinely think that there is an argument from pragmatism there. In terms of Cauldron 1, Spell 35, love that analogy. There are ways of interacting with older models through the API that don't exist through the happy interfaces. So if someone is sufficiently determined, they can rerun it. I would say that for a lot of what we're doing, the idea of rerunning is a lot less interesting than the idea of looking at and judging and iterating. And again, this is why I think that there is a legitimate tension between transparency and reproducibility, but I think that that iterating, 35A, that I can iterate on because I saw your 35, is meaningful in a way that isn't just transparency. And I think playing with that tension is going to be a very important part of our breakout. I've already been talking for half an hour. Time is my enemy. So I would say that a rough thing that I'm talking about in terms of AI use is you build your prompts, you interact with them, you capture everything, you review, you refine, and you iterate. And as part of that, you're publishing. This is also how we build judgment in our outputs. The metacognitive looking at us, looking at the output and judging if it's appropriate is a really important component of this whole thing, because we are effectively, and I know that this is going to cause everyone who's not in the social sciences to look at me as if I'm weird, because I am, we're developing taste. We are saying, yes, this output from AI accomplishes my goals. There is an aesthetic, subjective sense of utility there that is weird to everyone who says that they are just a hardline scientist. Yeah. I would say that this process of using AI, especially the refine part, is central to the effective use of AI by us as professional researchers with professional trained judgment. Also, let's be clear, the best reason to publish your prompts and do all this is you're building your own grimoire, because no one else cares. Let's be clear. The person who benefits from all of this work by myself is me, because I can just go back to my old prompts and copy and paste. The second order people who benefit are peer reviewers who, if they really care, can go look at my judgment. But I'm sorry, all of us are peer reviewed. We don't have time for that. So this is also a way of introducing better judgment of AI use into the process, just like better code documentation exists in that wise. We've covered the journal policies. I would say that there's deep, inconsistent practices across disciplines. We can talk about that, about attraction to technology. We can talk about that as, do I, as discipline X, like writing papers? Because I certainly hear from my colleagues in science and engineering that they'll do all the research quite happily up until the paper, and then they will drop it into an AI because they don't want to write the paper. Okay, that's fine if your prompts are good and if you're using a good model. Please don't use bad models. Don't use free models for that. You're going to be sad, right? There's also no shared research infrastructure. what we need, literally as you were talking about, Cauldron 1 Spell 35, is something that we have built dedicated research infrastructure for code. There's no reason why we cannot build that same research infrastructure, given money, given time, given the long view of time, for AI use, where we genuinely can go, yes, this is reproducible as a chat. Here are the 10 variations of my chat. This is a robust line of thinking. The world's our oyster, theoretically. But we have no standards. We have no standards for use. We have no standards for, here are the places where if you use AI, you're just going to be sad this week. Because, of course, the models change every 6 to 8 weeks. But there are certainly a set of places where you will be sad if you use AI in that specific part of the research process. They change. So having some standards for that, this, by the way, is the paper I did with QUT. So if you're interested, that link should resolve for you all. There are no standards. There are no norms. So, grimoires. One of the useful outputs of this, besides raw prompt logs, are patterns of interaction, spell 35, of tested prompts, but beyond tested prompts, documented workflows in the open data sense. Here is the process by which I take data of such and such nature and do this. Here's the process by which I do gap analysis. Here's the process by which I X. I work on spell 35A1. Because what I'm really talking about is establishing norms for creating reusable patterns from prompts as a way of sharing our expertise. And tooling, and if I'm very, 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 very lucky, building community knowledge so that we can pass these repositories of useful techniques around just like we used to and currently pass grad students around. Latour, anyone? Just me? Cool. Laboratory Life, Bruno Latour. And Peter Gallison talks about the tacit knowledge involved in grad students moving from lab to lab. And things don't work until the right grad student shows up. So like, there is precedent for this in science. And that's how you know I wrote that. Yeah, I blame me. Okay, we've been having some wonderful interaction. Anyone on this side? Thoughts, comments? This part of the class is good. Awkward silence? Aw, all right. So, I'm going to outline a bunch of challenges that I thought of. I'm delighted to say that our discussion has made more. This is great. What I'm going to want us to do, and yes, this is going to require thought and words and movement on your part, is cluster together for people who feel strongly about these challenges and come up with some discussion around that challenge. So here are a few. Do not be limited to this. Here are a few. So, 1, missing standards. What needs are there for standardization? So, what is a valid prompt documentation format? How do we capture interactions? What metadata is there on the shape of the cauldron? Can we possibly use version control? And how do we solve the attribution problem? Because that's going to be awful. Publisher requirements. What are your understandings of the various disciplines and the various publisher requirements? And what I want you to answer in this group is a normative question of what should journals and publishers actually require. I'm not sure if I should forbid you or encourage you to join that group. Technical barriers. What are the technical barriers we already know that are problems? Volume is going to be a fun one. Privacy is going to be awful. Proprietary is going to be awful. Like literally it goes on, it's fractal. Ethics. Because yeah, I'm also a philosopher, and thinking about the ethics of this is critical as part of establishing an interest group, because we need to have opinions. How do we deal with sensitive data? How do you deal with a researcher who's going along, talking about their research, digresses into problems with their home life, and then goes back and dealing with their research? Not speaking from experience there. How do we deal with PII? How do we deal with proprietary information? Here's a really important question. Quite a few of my interactions with AI as I'm working towards a paper or a methodology don't work. This is the whole null publication problem. How do you, do you want to document every attempt, or do you only want to document the successful ones? There's a real tension there. And then I think a real big one is context. What amount of context is appropriate and ethical to document here? So, it's 5:09. This session ends at 6. I think a 20-minute discussion at the end is appropriate, because once groups start going, they will get going. The online is quiet, so I'm going to engage with them myself if they have questions. Otherwise, we'll go on. I would like you all to group up and each answer one of those questions, or even better, a question of your own devising. I would say if people have deep opinions about one of those things, to shout loudly right now to gather people who are interested with them. What I've done, if you want to be fun, is I have given you a prompt that you can drop into AI. This is one of my fundamental techniques. As a way of operationalizing and building consensus, if you want to be spicy, drop this into Claude, I would say is probably going to be better. Gemini will actually you to death, but one of the two. Play with that. So, anyone who feels strongly, start saying what your topic is. Otherwise, group up and drop your discussion into the shared notes. I will be orbiting. We will have at least 30 minutes, and I might push it if we're still talking. Excellent. Journal requirements and policies. Person?
Just can you go back to the questions really quickly?
Absolutely.
And drag the divider across so the slides on the left are
Ooh, yes, that's a good idea. Or, there should be, how many academics does it take to share a slide deck?
always one more than you have in the room.
Correct. Okay, so these are my thinking so far. Do not feel bound to this. I've set a timer. The cuckoo clock will ding in 30 minutes. Begin.
Anyone wants to talk about ethics?
Keep a weather eye on chat. I don't think there's anyone in chat. No, we'll keep going, but cool. Hello. You know what? Yes, because that would help everything so much. And yeah, absolutely. I just need to figure out. So,
Yeah, I should have done that.
yes, the problem. What I tried to do, and I tried to do that. The problem is that
you're the one that's been taking
it's
that.
edit everyone, not just edit me. So I was a little bit shy.
I mean, they're at least in the Q&A.
Sorry, I have to do this on this computer, not that computer. One moment, and I'll...
And then a thought to complicate things even further.
Delightful.
Because they're not complicated enough now.
It's simples. Sure.
How hard can it be?
Okay, why... Cut. Paste. Great. There you are. Hello.
Hi, I'm going to just be back into the sales
Yeah, yeah.
conversation because that's the kind of tragic individual I am.
Yes.
The complication. You're assuming that people are just using AIs as black boxes or scorpions. You know, you give it an incantation, it spits something out. Ish, to a first approximation.
To a first, yeah.
The complication is what happens as we move into agentic.
Well, so did you see how neatly I dodged that question?
No, I wasn't here when you did the dodging.
Yes. Basically, we need to be pushing for transparent agentic runs.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Well, yes, but also we need to have standards on how to document the agentic runs.
Yeah, the problem is that once you've got black boxes that are invoking other black boxes, I just think it's all going
It's
to
turtles all the way down.
Well, it's not just turtles all the way down. It's going to become exponentially worse at each step.
Yes.
Yeah.
I still think that there is virtue in what we are doing rather than abdicating all responsibility, because you can look at the run and see if the run is acceptable. And,
Yes,
and
yes, but
there is
but
a norm-setting responsibility that we have.
Sure, I mean, King Canute tried a rule-setting responsibility with respect to tides.
I agree. I use the same analogy. No, and that's the thing is, if not, then we get an even more fun thing and get to dictate what the shape of science looks like.
Oh, just one of the smaller problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That-
Kuhnian paradigm.
I mean, let's be clear. I'm personally Lakatoshian rather than Kuhnian, and I think that this works a lot better as a research program problem than a paradigm problem. But we're digressing.
The trouble is that you're thinking about a research program problem while
Yes.
the world of AI is in this
Is selling.
insane
Yes.
bubble
They
where
are.
everyone is engaged in a Red Queen's race.
They are all selling a paradigm shift as a marketing ploy, and that's deeply problematic.
Yeah, but my worry is that whether or not they're selling it as a marketing ploy, we're going to get a paradigm shift whether we like it or not.
I am forced to agree. I'm helpful. Okay. Actually, do you want me to copy this? No, it's all good. I feel guilty that you're doing that instead of engaging with them. Control Shift V for paste. Amazing. Okay. The cuckoo clock has rung, and we are 20 minutes out. We are 18 minutes out. I stand corrected. We have two options because it looks like groups are really into this. One, each of you can tell the other, each group can give a brief report to the others about what they're thinking about. Or two, we can just keep talking and keep taking notes, and we'll write up our notes in an email and send it to everyone who's interested. Okay? Fantastic. In that case, I will regretfully interrupt you all. Yes?
I would suggest in addition on this, after we share around so we know what we talk about, that we also talk about what are next steps for...
Yes. We explicitly need to take next steps for an interest group, and you will see that I have started that with the most fun part of PII. And if you're interested, we can signal our interest there, and I'll start talking to the RDA people about what that entails. Let me be clear. I will use what is in our notes as the basis of our remit, not what I came up with. If there are parts of what I came up with that you think are worthwhile, make sure they're in our notes. This is how democracy works, I think. All right. So I will choose by proximity this group first. Who is your spokesperson? This is literally undergrad group conversation. Who's your spokesperson?
Andrew Trelaw.
Which group?
Whatever. Standardization.
Great.
Andrew Trelaw, Australian Research Data Commons, but you probably know that already. So I guess the key, we had a fantastic conversation. The key insight from it would be that essentially we're just talking about methods. So rather than talk about transparency or reproducibility, just talk about document your methods, guys. And so then the question is, great, but how? And so the what could be extended, captured by my beautiful assistant on the left, kind of stealing from research software. So Fair for Research software, there's the stuff there we can filch. Code Meta's another one. Jeff suggested, yeah, but aren't we just talking about workflows? So there are workflow languages that we could steal stuff from. If we capture this in a method section, where's a good place to standardize it? Protocols.io is one of the suggestions. So that looks like it's a tractable problem. The challenge is going to be working out what's the minimum information that's needed for the method section, and how do you do this in a way that doesn't just impose more unfunded work on the researchers? So how can you make it as easy as possible? And one of the cooler ideas was, at the start of your interaction, you tell the LLM, at the end of this interaction, I'm going to ask you to document it in this format, and then at the end you say, now spit it out for me in this format. I mean, it's still more work for the researcher, but it's much less more work. Yeah. That's a terrible sentence.
There's some discussion that I want to have around meta work, like is copy editing in the methods section? So I think that that is a live question, and I would say that ideation and everything up to copy editing, so it's not into an infinite recurse. Excellent. So that group is interested. We are going. Oh, all right. But also you volunteered. Yeah. I am in full classroom mode right now.
Yeah, on the copy editing question, it depends. I mean, sometimes when people use a full-on external English language editing service or whatever to publish a journal article, we do ask them to declare it, or if someone's been extensively involved. So, yeah, it depends to what extent. Yeah, and it varies a lot by discipline, again, is what I've seen. Yeah. We sort of had a pretty broad-ranging conversation. I mean, my experience is that it would be very difficult to standardize a lot of these things across all publishers and fields. There are really different views even within disciplines. But there are some things that we can all agree on, like AI can't be listed as an author of an article because the author's responsibilities are more than just, yeah, writing.
AI cannot be fired, therefore
Yeah.
it cannot be an author.
We talked a lot about what people are using AI for and what counts as like a benign use, as like just spell checking, as opposed to actually using AI to do significant parts of the research, and how that might be declared, which again would probably vary across different disciplines a lot. But and we talked a lot about how the researchers are still ultimately responsible for checking the outputs of an LLM and checking that it's actually valid work, and that very few people would just take something and paste the whole output from a prompt word for word into a research article or something like that. But on the other hand, we talked about the tensions of publish or perish mentality and how people have motivations to just put out as many articles as possible, and how publishers also, if they're reliant on the APC model of publishing, have an incentive to publish as many articles as possible, accept as many articles as possible. And so there's work for journals there to make sure we're properly doing peer review. I'm sort of jumping around here, sorry. We talked about the extra effort required of researchers, and how, if you're writing an article, it's an iterative process. You go through prompt after prompt and maybe hundreds or thousands of prompts. Is it really sensible to document every single one of them? And who's going to have the time to do that? So without machine actionable ways to get an output from the AI potentially, it's going to be difficult to encourage people. We talked also a bit about using AI in research and having access to content and access to information from different databases. If they're all building their own LLMs and saying, if you want to use AI to analyze our content, you must use our LLM, and that creates a fragmented landscape, much like the old text and data mining problems, where if you wanted to do a systematic review of a corpus of journal articles, you'd have to go to 15 different publishers and get agreement from each one of them. And so if each different database publisher, whatever, has their own LLM and says you can't combine their stuff with other stuff in an LLM, that causes issues for research. What else was there anything else key here that I haven't touched on yet? How many authors are actually acknowledging AI use, because the comment here was everyone's absolutely using LLMs, and
and definitionally, because almost all authors are using Word.
As I said,
So
Office 365 explicitly markets their AI, like their spell checking, as an AI service, so everyone's using it. And I know from our perspective, it's really difficult to actually get an answer to that question. How many declarations are there? Because there's no standard way to declare it yet. We don't like data availability statements. We've gotten pretty standardized on, but we've had some journals ask us, can we have an AI of statements as a separate thing in an article? Does that get captured in metadata? Because at the moment, some people put it in as part of the methods, some people use an acknowledgement. So part of the discussion is what you should declare and why, and where is also to be able to report on who's declaring it and what they're declaring. Okay, sorry, I'll stop.
No. So what I'm going to say, given that we're 10 minutes out and I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not keeping you for beer time, is for the groups who have already presented, if there are topics that you think the interest group should be interested in based on your presentations or your discussions, drop them in the interest group section, or bold them or somehow signify them so that we have useful metadata from the output of today. You folks are close, therefore, who's your volunteer?
Hello, I'm Charlie. I work at the Murray-Darling Basin Authority from Australia, I guess. We sort of talked about a range of things. We first talked about, we talked about ethics, first of all. So we talked about, governance, protocols, what they might be for even using LLMs to even, use sensitive data in that context, like what would even be allowed, what was appropriate with that. It needs to be very specific to the context is what we came to the, conclusion of. You can't really have a universal standardization of that. And then we sort of talked about the levels of trust within that. So I think, how would we know it was trustworthy? Someone said prompt, process, and provenance as the 3 Ps, which I thought, that was quite a good way of looking at it. So, where did it come from? What process was used? What prompts were used? And whether that would be a way to know that it was trustworthy. And then whether putting the sensitive data in as a prompt, what could actually be disclosed, because obviously you couldn't disclose the sensitive data. So whether that would be just showing the process of it as opposed to the final data. And then, yeah, then we talked about actually using LLMs as a way to get metadata and how that potentially could be put into catalogs and shown as part of the process as well. And ethics committees came up as a big thing too. So how at the time you wanted to use the LLM, getting the ethics approvals, that clear, plain language, especially when talking to community groups, and having that clear documentation. And then the last sort of thing was talking about the expensive commercial AIs and well, not so sorry, but basically people saying sometimes the better LLMs could be cost prohibitive, and potentially having something in between that's more of a collective ownership to make it more accessible, especially to groups that more likely to have sensitive data, Indigenous people, disabilities, all those things. So medical data, things where we wouldn't want it to be cost prohibitive. Was there anything else anyone wanted to add?
Based on just that last one alone, I will say one of the things we might want to say is our requests to NCI for serving large language models might be part of this. I'm sure that they would love to hear what we have to say and have no problems whatsoever with that. But yes, cool. And I think the last group's over there.
Yeah, perhaps we were a kind of slightly naive version of the first group.
That's fine.
Thinking about that, several of us didn't really have much practical experience or knowledge about how large language models work.
We document all of this.
Yes. So we've come up with just it was a simple exercise really, just to think of the kinds of metadata we might want to try to capture without really going on to think about how easy or difficult it would be to actually capture the effort required to record it or anything else. But we started off talking a little bit about the need to capture motivations. So the motivation for the research topic, the motivation for why you're using AI, the motivation for choosing the model, all very important contextual information, which you couldn't otherwise capture easily. The model used, when, who, how the model was accessed, whether it was via standard kind of prompts and via a web interface or the API. Something about the data used for training. Not sure how possible it is to even know that in sort of black box models, but the kinds of responses you're going to get are going to be so dependent on the training data. How you go about capturing that, no idea. But it seemed important to us in our naive way.
There is a question, I believe. I'll just interrupt you.
Sure, yeah.
Live.
Amy Nurnberger, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. On the question of the training data, I think there are two separate questions there, right? You have your large language models that many of them are quite opaque, but how I see researchers using large language models is actually not in the form of authorship, but in the form of other types of research where they will take a smaller model that they run locally, train it on their own set of data, right? And thinking about how LLMs are being used in that way, which I want to make sure is included in this overall conversation as well, since it seems to have been fairly focused on LLMs for authorship or for ideation, but thinking about fine-tuning for other purposes too. So not at all unreasonable.
Now, fine-tuning and basically anything after the production of the foundation model can be in our remit. Sorry, please continue.
I think that was actually pretty much it. I don't think we spoke that much about any of the other things. Does anybody else in the group have something they'd like to mention that I'm missing in our relatively short and sweet? System prompts, that's true actually. We did talk a little bit about the system prompts, not least because I didn't really know what they were. But now I do. I feel much better informed. But trying to capture, the system prompts that have gone into it that are lying behind things would also be very useful.
Okay, so thank you all. You have accomplished my goals exactly. The rough pattern is I will be using, sorry, I need to be using my indoor voice and microphone. I will be using this as a pitch to turn this group into an interest group for RDA so that we can start talking about XKCD's 18th standard, because that is, let's be clear, what we're proposing. But hey, tradition. I would love if, as thoughts occurred to you, live topics of interest to the interest group, not right now, drop it in the doc. I will figure out some form of communication for these emails. Honestly, probably just a mailing list because anything else will be too annoying, but I'll figure it out. And I will start gathering us together. So I've promised a number of you beers and talk about AI and education policy and my various spicy takes thereof. As soon as we're done with that welcome reception, that is on offer. So thank you all. And please email me with whatever questions you have around AI, research, education, policy, etc. Thank you.